Thanks for staying with us. Now, after years of battles between government and motorists, Gauteng Etolls might soon be a thing of the past. Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi says the controversial system will be scrapped once proper procedures have been followed. Lesufi says this will be discussed in a future meeting with the finance and transport ministers. For more on this, we are joined by Outa's Duvenage. Thank you so much for your time, Wayne. We do appreciate it. I think let's start off with that briefing by the Premier of Gauteng Panyaza Lesufi. I left there a lot more confused. Even during the medium-term budget policy statement with the finance minister, there isn't really clarity or a proper explanation as to what exactly is going to happen with Etolls. From your understanding, are they going to be scrapped?
Yeah, they've got no option but to scrap the scheme. I think they've announced that in the greater scheme of things, that the funding for this GFIP debt, this Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project debt, is going to be funded by Treasury largely. And they talk about 30% from Gauteng province, but what you can hear and see since over the last 10 days or so, the plan is not clear. They haven't come with a very clear plan on how to do this. But Etolls in itself is dead. Anybody who's paying 1 cent towards Etolls today is wasting their money.
You have been very vocal and at the forefront of getting Etolls scrapped. The whole scheme has been very distressing for motorists, and I think it was rather unfair because it was imposed on Gauteng motorists while you have the whole country using Gauteng roads. From your understanding, if there is any understanding, because we still don't know, what is that 30% debt? What does that debt consist of and how much is it? Do you know?
Yeah, well, this is what we don't know. There's a lot of figures being bandied about. What we do know, though, is that in 2012, when SANRAL presented its numbers to the courts, it was a 20 billion rand bonds that they took out for the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project, plus the infrastructure of the e-tolling. By the way, the road construction was about 18 billion of that, which was, we say, 2 to 3 times over the price it should have been. But let's put that aside. So we're overpaying because SANRAL largely looked away while the construction collusion and corruption was going on. But here we have this massive debt, 20 billion. And over the last 10 years, since 2012 to now, Treasury has allocated to SANRAL 22.4 billion rand for the Gauteng debt. So if you look at that and the interest that had unfolded over that period, we want to know what happened to that money, because if that was used to offset the debt, then we should have very little left. Now we hear figures like 43 billion rand, of which 70% is supposedly coming from Treasury, 30% of that has to come from Gauteng province, and we believe that Gauteng province is being hoodwinked. We believe they don't have the facts and we need to engage with them, so we're very pleased that Panyaza Lesufi has indicated he'll be engaging with civil society, including Outa, and we'll shed some light and some clarity on what this is. But SANRAL now needs to be extremely transparent about exactly what has happened to that money and how they have financed this debt over the last 10 years.
Certainly, because yesterday when I asked the Premier as to whether or not motorists will be off the hook now when it comes to e-tolls, he basically said that they're going to have to find other ways to fund the maintenance of the road, the infrastructure and so forth. And he said this could possibly be done through other levies. And I asked him the question and said, but what if motorists and residents of Gauteng reject this? Because at the end of the day, pockets are tight, things are not good in our economy, and they rejected the model scheme of e-tolls. What is, what's stopping them from rejecting other levies or any other revenue model that the Premier is saying could possibly be implemented so that they can collect that revenue? From your understanding, do you think that motorists are safe now, or do you think that there's going to be another levy or other levies put in place for them to collect that revenue?
Well, they're safe from an e-tolling perspective. They can never open that door again. That horse is bolted. You can't introduce this camera-based electronic drive now, pay later scheme. It just doesn't work. SANRAL couldn't get it right. I don't know how the Gauteng province will get it right. Now, the province doesn't have, like local government, an ability to bill residents other than through vehicle licensing, possibly. But the minute you start tampering with that and you start pushing up the cost of vehicle licenses here out of proportion with what it is in other provinces around the country, what will happen is big fleet owners who've got offices around the country will just license their vehicles outside of Gauteng. So there has to be parity in vehicle licensing. You can't have these massive differences between provinces. So that's not an option. Gauteng, the provincial administrators have no other way to levy citizens, no other way, other than getting revenue from National Treasury, which is how they do get revenue to fund roads anyway. So this is a national issue. It'll have to remain there. And obviously Gauteng needs to start looking at how it's going to finance its next phases of these Gauteng freeway upgrades, the maintenance thereof. That's the conversation that has to happen. But it's not going to happen through this tolling mechanism. And I think they realize that. And I think the whole discussion on road pricing around the country has been raised so often, but nobody's coming to the fore. And our biggest problem is that we see so many companies getting contracts to fix roads and resurface roads around the country. And within 3 years, those roads are decimated. Nobody's holding those companies to account for the poor work. The MECs of transport in all the provinces are largely remiss in their duties to ensure good oversight, banning of companies and directors of those companies that are wasting our money. There's a lot of work to be done in that area. So coming back to Gauteng, Etolls is dead. We now need to find a way to finance this infrastructure, because we all know we have to pay for it. Government doesn't pay for it. We pay for it through government. And government keeps thinking that it's their money. It's not. It's our money. And we have to pay for it somehow. But what is the most efficient way, Heidi? That's the biggest problem.
And just to your point, the roads are a mess. I have the worst anxiety driving, especially at night. It's shocking and alarming that we have toll gates that, just until recently, Etolls, but the state of our roads are just really in a bad way. I want to ask you about those motorists that were diligent and decided to pay from the very first day. What happens to them? What do you think is going to happen to them? Is there a way for them to be reimbursed, or how will that whole process work?
Heidi, we don't think so, but it's not for us to answer. That's for SANRAL to answer. In reality, those people who did pay took themselves out of the threats that SANRAL was bringing to the 80% who weren't paying. So remember, those who weren't paying were being threatened with criminal records, vehicles not being licensed, credit downgrades, summonses. But they stood their ground. Those who decided to pay, which has been 20% on average since the scheme launched, removed themselves from those threats. I think what they should be doing is thanking those who stood their ground and bringing this evil scheme to an end, so that they don't have to pay going forward. Whether SANRAL will refund them, I doubt it, because they weren't billing unlawfully. Recently in Tshwane, a judge ordered Tshwane to pay back the residents for overcharging on tariffs, taxes and tariffs. And so that's a court ruling, unless the citizen can get a court ruling. But SANRAL haven't been billing unlawfully, so they're not compelled to repay. And I think those who've been paying just need to move on with this fact. But let them try and get the money back. We are not going to fight that fight. Yeah, no,
I mean, shame. I think those watching are thinking, why was I paying? Yeah. I just want to ask you one last question. I don't want to make it political, but I have to ask. We asked the Premier this yesterday as well, and we said to him, was this a political move for you to decide to scrap Etolls, or was the model just not working? And he said the model was just not working, given the fact that only 20% were paying. Why do you think government was almost pushed in a corner to scrap this and to mention this in the medium-term budget policy statements, especially because there was so much pressure? I don't know how many times I asked the Transport Minister what's happening with Etolls, and I was told in the next 6 months and in the next 2 months.
Well, the writing was on the wall since 2014, when the scheme was rapidly going into low compliance levels. And sadly, that took so long, and every time there was an election, 2019, 2021, it became a political football. I think this is still 18 months to the next elections, probably not necessarily a political football right now. They had no option. They were in the corner. Society had really dealt them this blow that they needed to scrap a scheme that was grossly irrational and expensive and never going to work. And somewhere along the line, they had to come to this decision. They finally came to it, but we believe, 5-6 years later than they should have. But we're here. Now we need to move on, but we need clarity on where this money is going to come from.